Hi everyone, my name is Steph. I'm one of the co-directors of Science in the News.
I'm Katie, also one of the co-directors of Science in the News.
We just wanted to say thank you so much for coming out. It's been a really crazy 36 hours, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come out here because these people put a lot of work into this talk and it's really great, so we hope you enjoy it. Katie's going to tell us a little bit about what we do here.
Yeah, so is anyone attending their first Science in the News event tonight? Okay, great, a few, so welcome. We hope you'll be joining us again and again after tonight's wonderful lecture. But just to give you all a sense of what Science in the News is all about, I just want to tell you that we're a graduate student organization based here at Harvard. We recruit from all the different graduate programs from Cambridge and the Longwood Medical area. And we have two main goals. So the first is to effectively communicate cutting-edge science to members of the general public at an understandable level. And the second is to train a new generation of graduate students to better communicate their work.
Right, and so part of this is our lecture series here tonight. This is our second to last lecture. There'll be one next week as well, so I hope you'll join us for that. And we'll just let them take it away and get started. Go ahead, guys.
Great. Well, welcome everybody for coming. My name is Adam Rizelman. I'm a third-year PhD student on the Bioinformatics and Integrative Genomics PhD program here at Harvard University. And tonight I'll be talking about big data with my friends Rebecca Fine and Chamath Fonseca. Before we start, yeah, sorry. So, before we get started, I'd like to say something that you all like to hear, but you are valuable. I believe sincerely that each and every one of you are valuable, but that's not what I mean quite yet for this talk. What I'd like to say is that your data is valuable. I know all of you spend a lot of time concerned about the things you buy, the money you spend, and where you spend that money. Private organizations and companies are aggregating this data, your spending decisions, recording it and processing it to give you targeted ads and product placement for the things that you want to buy. So, for example, let's take your cell phone, something that's probably sitting in your pocket right now. So this cell phone has the phone numbers of all the people that you contact. It has text messages that say who you contacted, what you said, when you contacted them. It has apps that might have your credit card information or other browsing history or other really important information, as well as your location at any given time that about every couple seconds is talking to a couple cell phone towers in the area. So, these companies are using, many private organizations as well as the government can record this data, aggregate it, and really come up with a profile of you. And speaking of you, you are also big data. The genetic instruction book is 3 billion base pairs of DNA. That's really the instruction book that makes you, you. These are the instructions to you, and this really is the idea of big data. So what do all of these things have in common? We can now take measurements of so many different things in this world. And now we have the ability to organize, store, and process this information. And this is where we come up with the idea of big data, is really this explosion in our ability to organize, store, and process this information. So on the roadmap to big data, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history and background of big data. So how did we get to the idea of big data? What does that even mean, big data? So what is data, and or how big are we talking? As well as some historical and modern computing techniques that are being done in the field right now. Rebecca will talk about some algorithms, so under the hood, how some of these things work. And Chamath will talk about going forward, what our future in big data looks like, and what policies and other algorithms are really around the corner that we're going to have to do. A brief history of data, I think it's first good to kind of come up with like, what is this broad concept of data? And so data is just facts or descriptions of really anything that can be measured. They're, so I think kind of a concrete way to think about this is to come up with some examples. So one idea I mentioned is some phone records. So, many of you will get like your phone bill at the end of the month. And, these constantly have like just a giant stream of the numbers you contacted, when you contacted them, how long these calls lasted, whether they went in or out, and many times the locations of these calls. This is something that's all stored and processed by a phone company, and it's kept, and it's something that's easily recorded. Another idea of this big data is DNA. So I talked again about these 3 billion base pairs of DNA. This is just a small snippet of it, and it's just this amalgamations of C's, T's, A's, and G's. So when we think about how big this actually is, if you took the human genome and you printed it out in books, those letters would fill up a bookshelf. So when we're talking about kind of projects managing big data with regards to, really the information that makes up you, it's a lot. It's a lot of letters and numbers. So what does this data look like? We need to break it down into a form that computers can use. So this is just little pulses of electricity that computers can natively read in with their circuits. And these are ones and zeros on and off. And this is binary. This is the bits of the computer, the ones and zeros that are binary. So for example, we can look at the letter A, for example. Now a computer, if you look at the letter A, we can kind of see, oh, this stroke means, the first letter of the alphabet. But a computer can't read in an A. That's kind of like a human concept of like writing it down and entering it to something like on a piece of paper on the computer. So how does a computer take in that information into the little pulses of electricity of ones and zeros? So you can kind of have a translation table that will break down letters into a computable, readable format. So for this, you can take an A and break it down into the little pulses of electricity, the 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. You can do this for larger, more, like larger pieces of text. So for example, beep, boop, I'm a robot. Will be broken down into these ones and zeros that can be represented and processed on the computer. So how do we process this data? So now we can take in things as big as bookshelves and to process, to handle that amount of data. But how do we process it? So first, I'd like to introduce the concept of an algorithm. And an algorithm is simply just a fancy word for a recipe from getting some input to some output. We have some data, like the human genome or like the cell phone data I talked about before. We want to process it in some way to get some output. Another word that's useful is a variable. So in that algorithm, if we're, say, making a cake, I have this recipe book that will tell me to add these ingredients in a certain way to make a cake. Now, I can think of a lot of different ingredients to put in cake that may or may not make a cake, but if I follow this recipe and place these ingredients for the variables as the recipe tells me, I get my cake, which is great. So how do we get the computer to run an algorithm on this data? So we have an algorithm, we have something we want to do with the data, we have a place to put the data and to process it. How do we get the computer to run that algorithm on the data? So you can think of these code books as like a recipe book. It's like these algorithms as just a recipe book for how we process data. And so an interesting history of this is that the original way that computers worked were with punch cards. Now this was around like the 1940s and 1950s. And you can see here, if you look closely at the card, they have little numbers that are punched out of this, out of the punch card. And so they have these really big computers that would read in these punch cards. And so the computer would read these in, and then that would be the way for the human to interact with the computer to tell the bits to go one way or another. And so this computer is the Harvard Mark I. So if you're interested, it's in the Science Center on Harvard's main campus. And so some like an interesting historical note. Many of you have maybe on a computer every once in a while, like you type something into Windows or something, and it spits out like some error or some bug. So the term a computer bug, actually, or a code bug, actually came from a real bug being stuck in one of these punch cards. So Grace Hopper, one of the original people, original women that developed computer algorithms, there was something wrong with their code. There was something wrong with the punch cards. They went through it, and that moth was stuck in one of the holes. And so this was the first time a computer bug was ever reported. And the name just kind of stuck around from there. So that was how you stored and processed data. But now we've gotten a lot better and a lot faster at processing this data. So all hard drives now usually have either a magnetic disk, that's your hard drive, and the other one is kind of flash drives. So these like really tiny things that you can plug into computers that can store data. And so just to kind of put into scale how much information I can fit onto this little thing in my hand right now. This is a 32 gigabyte jump drive or flash drive. So like standard one that you could go, I picked this one up at Office Max the other day. So that is then 8 billion ones and zeros that I can fit onto the palm of my hand, which is like kind of crazy to think that I can fit it real tiny. And so this was $5 to $10, so it's pretty economic for us to throw tons of information on this little thing right here. And so that's 42 copies of my genome. So that 3 billion base pairs of DNA that I can fit in the palm of my hand. So for scale, back to that bookcase, I can fit 42 copies of this bookcase and just hold it in the palm of my hand. And that's like a really exciting time that we're getting into computing. So some ideas of processing. So we can store data, we have algorithms, but now we need something to do with it. Now we need to process this information into a usable form, so we can make inferences from it. So modern computing has become much faster than just putting a punch card in slowly, getting some result out of it. But it's usually done by a divide and conquer approach. So this is known as parallel computing. So this is like your Samsung Galaxy. This is has a parallel computer inside of it. So we're going to do a parallel computer. Non-parallel computing can be brought back to our idea of a recipe or an algorithm. So if I'm making a cake, what I would do is I preheat the oven, then I mix my ingredients, and then I grease the pan, put all the ingredients together, bake it, and then I would get my output. And that's non-parallel computing. But say if I had something to do that day and I was kind of busy, I would maybe I'll recruit some of my friends and family to help me bake the cake. So maybe I'll have person A preheat the oven, person 2 mix the ingredients, person 3 grease the pan. All these things are done in parallel, and that's really kind of the idea of parallel computing. So on a computer, this is known as a core, not like an Apple core, but a computing core. And so each of these processes is done on a computing core. So this phone right here is a 4-core computer. So there are 4 processors that can do calculations at one given time. So each bit of the algorithm is just broken down onto each of these cores, just like a recipe can be broken up to divide and conquer and to produce a result. So dealing with big data requires a lot of small tasks. So imagine I'm on the internet and I want to find something. I want to find something useful. Like maybe, for example, there was a cat picture I saw the other day that I love cats, and I just wanted to find this cat picture again. So maybe you want to find that cat picture on the internet. But as you can imagine, the internet is a really big place. So if I just had one person search the internet, it would take a really long time to go pretty much just scour the internet to find that picture of the cat. However, one example of a parallel computing task is now I can have multiple instances where I look for this cat, and what do you know? It's right there. So in a more pictorial form, in a single core computing, say if I'm trying to turn some input to an output and I have only one processor or one core, it'll take some time to crank through the data. But in a multi-processing scheme, I can go through it a lot faster. But what kind of problems, like why do we need, big processing schemes to get these things completed? So like, why do we need this? What's the point? So one example is telescopes. So, like the Hubble telescope and other telescopes are always pointed up at the sky. And there are billions of, of separate galaxies and stars and planets to explore. How do we look at all of those galaxies and all of those planets and all of those stars? It's going to take a really long time if we have one computer or one person looking at every one, making a decision whether it's important or not. So it'd be better if we could, like split up this task. Like somebody look at this part of the computer, somebody look at these stars, somebody look at these stars, somebody look at these stars to find out if we have something interesting. Another example of this is the Large Hadron Collider. This was in the news a couple months ago, where it's like a huge physics experiment that's being done in Europe, and so it's the discovery of some fun physics particles. But every year, this the experiment generates 1 million of these jump drives worth of data. So just these experiments just crank out tons of data, and somebody needs to process it. So you need this parallel processing. So how big can parallel processing and kind of computing get? So I have worked for the Department of Energy as well as with grad school, and so something that the U.S. Department of Energy has been pushing is the Exascale Computing Initiative. So many of you may be wondering the exascale, what does that exactly mean? And so I was kind of confused by that until someone put that into scale for me. So we have 1 quintillion calculations per second, or 1.0 times 10 to the 18th of these calculations. So you're essentially adding those numbers every single second. So I think it's hard to get the scale of exascale computing. So one way to break it down is that imagine I have the population of India, which is roughly about 1 billion people. Now I take 1 billion of the population of India, so 1 billion people, and then everybody in those copies of that entire nation does a calculation every single second. That is exascale computing. So you can imagine if you're running a program, this number of calculations is done, in a minute. This, really an unfathomably large number of calculations, and that is just, really, really exciting to me, honestly. So to summarize, we now have the ability to store and process this data. But in many things that we do have a data footprint. So either whether it be your phone or experiments or advertising or just browsing the internet, this is natively producing a digital output. And we need to have some sort of meaningful inferences. We need to develop algorithms to process this data. So Rebecca will be talking about how these algorithms deal with data. But first, I'd like to see if anybody has any questions. Sure, yes.
There is something in quantum computing right now.
Yeah.
Is that something you talk about? Is it in relation with quantum computing? Because the quantum computer I was reading that you can break some encryption, very hard encryption. And the other question is, where do you store the information? Because it's like a database, it's like a Red Hat database or an actual database. So where do you store all the information?
Sure. Yeah. So the first question was, what is the relation with quantum computing? So I don't know the nitty-gritty of how quantum computing, like the physics behind it, but my understanding of quantum computing relative to traditional computing. So before I talked about bits, these kind of things that are on and off, ones and zeros. So a quantum computer uses some of the ideas of relativistic physics of quantum physics. So when you start entering the really, really subatomic scale of atoms, physics starts acting really, really weird, which is, it's so counterintuitive. But instead of, we can think that like, okay, so this jump drive either exists or it doesn't exist. It's a 1 or a 0, just like in a traditional binary sense. But in a quantum computing, we're talking, what it actually is a spin of an electron. And so it's either, it can be in a superposition of, or it can be many positions at once, which is really hard to kind of comprehend. But instead of taking one bit, either a 1 or a 0, it can now expand the number of, let me the quantum computing world it's just so weird. But it expands relatively the number of bits. So essentially, instead of being a 1 or a 0, it can be it can do 16 calculations at once or 32 calculations at once. And relative to your encryption of those is that for the idea of quantum or for regular computing, it would for encryption you need to essentially lock down so you would need to do essentially an infinite number of computing steps to kind of find the key that opens the lock, which would be encryption. So with quantum computing, what you can essentially do is try all of them at once, and then once it finds the output, it will say, "Oh, I broke the encryption," and it'll be open. So this idea of kind of encryption is kind of it's really scary. So the second thing that you mentioned, which with data storage and/or cloud computing, I think this has really kind of been the advent, or it came around with the internet. So it's many times it's cheaper to instead just having a jump drive that I carry around or a hard drive on a computer. It's easier for some data center, maybe in Oregon somewhere, that can have just a giant room or kind of like a barn full of servers. And so instead of everybody buying one jump drive, you can have a company that will have rooms and rooms full of servers that are made to store data, and they're nice and cold and cool, and they're connected to the internet. So so for what I do, and I know Rebecca and Chamath do for their work, is that you can you essentially use the internet to talk to that server. The response time is it's instant. It's it's sitting right next to you, and that can store the data for a long term, and it's maybe cents on the gigabyte relative to actually buying it. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I'm sorry. Please look up the quantum computing stuff. It's kind of it's a whole other world. I don't think I'm doing it justice. I know that. Yes. Yeah.
The way you describe an algorithm is what I've always thought of as a program. Is there a difference, or is it just your use of the terminology?
I think so the question was what is the difference between an algorithm and a program? That's kind of one way to frame it. And I'd say, so an algorithm would just be, they're essentially the same. It's mainly semantics, but an algorithm is, how I would classify it as an algorithm is just a way to solve a problem. And a program is something where it's a deliverable, i.e., Microsoft will hand you Word, or some Office or Excel or some other program.
But a program really is instructions to take you from the input, process, output. I've always looked at it as an algorithm. It is really almost like a specialized routine that could be actually in a program. The algorithm is some unique calculation that you may invoke somewhere along the line.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's mainly semantics. I agree. Yeah. Any other questions?
One more question.
All right, great, thank you.
G3, or third year, in the Biological and Biomedical Sciences graduate program. I'm going to talk about sort of the next, I think, logical step after what Adam was discussing, and give you a little bit more of an idea of the nitty-gritty of how algorithms work and what they are, and really very importantly, the kinds of issues that we end up having to deal with when we're looking at data of this size. So I'm going to start by giving you some background on a particular example that I'm going to be using to illustrate these concepts, which is something that I hope you'll all find interesting. And the example is online dating. So let's say we have this random person, whose name happens to be Rachel. And Rachel really wants to find a boyfriend. But Rachel doesn't want to do this the sort of traditional way where you go to a bar, you go to a party, and you try to meet someone. She's too busy for that. She would rather sort of do it the newfangled way, which is basically going on a website and saying, website, here's my information, I want to date someone, deliver unto me a person who you think that I would be well matched with. And that is what she does. So in this case, Rachel sets up a profile on OkCupid, which is the particular online dating website that I'm going to be discussing. So just to sort of familiarize you with what online dating kind of looks like, this is a typical OkCupid profile. You'll see she has her picture, she has her username, she writes down a bunch of stuff about herself, this is who I am, basic sort of self-summary. But it's actually the sort of crux of the way that OkCupid works and most online dating sites work are match questions. So the idea behind match questions is we need to get at your personality to figure out who you would be compatible with. So we're going to ask you a bunch of questions about yourself, you're going to answer them, and then everybody else on the website is going to answer those questions, and we're going to use that to predict your compatibility with other people. So just so you get a sense of what this looks like, this is an example of a match question at OkCupid. Have you smoked a cigarette in the last 6 months? So you can see, you can answer the question. It also asks you what question you would want to see in a partner. And you also rank the importance of that question to you. Just to give you sort of a little bit more of the idea of the scope and the breadth of this, other examples would be, do you believe in God? Do you enjoy discussing politics? And could you date someone who was really messy? So Rachel goes and answers a bunch of these questions, and she gets a bunch of predictions for who she would be well matched with. And just to sort of show you 3 totally random and arbitrary people who this website is finding for her, you'll see here are 3 different profiles, and at the bottom, you will see a match percentage, so 75, 82, 83, and this is what the website predicts would be her level of compatibility with each of those 3 people. So let's sort of take a step back for a minute and talk very fundamentally about what sites like OkCupid are trying to do. They're trying to break down a question which is extremely complicated, and that is the problem of human attraction, and turn it into something that a computer can try to solve, and break it down into sort of the ones and zeros that Adam was discussing earlier. And the way that it does that is by gathering all of these data points about you, which in this case take the form of these match questions, and gathering similar data points about all these other people and trying to use those to predict compatibility. So to give you an idea of when I say OkCupid is big data, how big am I talking? I am talking really big, because as of 2011, OkCupid had 275,000 different match questions. So those are the questions like, do you believe in God? And actually about 776 million answers. So this is an absolutely gigantic and really, really cool data set. That I think is a really good choice to kind of illustrate principles of big data that we need to think about while sort of showing you the cool things we can learn from stuff like this. So I'm going to use that actually as a springboard now to talk about algorithms. I'm specifically going to describe to you the algorithm that OkCupid uses to give you a better idea of what we're really talking about when we use that word. So as Adam has already described to you, an algorithm is just a fancy word for a recipe for going from input to output. So your input is your ingredients, your output is your cake. So the OkCupid site is trying to answer a very specific problem, and that problem is, given a particular user, who who do we think would be a good match for that person? And so if I can draw your attention again to these input and output boxes, the input is now users' question answers, and the output is now your prediction of your match compatibility with another person. So let's break that down and really talk about what this algorithm actually looks like. So Rachel wants to know, remember our hypothetical user Rachel wants to know how well matched is she with this other user Ross. So okay, let's break this down. The three components of sort of the input here, which is the user's question answers box. So we start with what answer for a particular question does Rachel actually want to see? What is it that she, for this particular variable, what does she want to see in a potential boyfriend? The second piece is how important is that question for Rachel? And this is actually a critical subtlety because you can imagine that not all questions are sort of created equal in this way, right? There might be some things that are deal breakers for Rachel. There are other things that she really might not care about very much at all, and then there are a lot of things in between. So it's important to factor that in to how this algorithm is going to work. And finally, of course, we have what answer did Ross actually give? So given this question, what did Ross actually say? So this importance piece of it actually turns out to be quite critical to the overall way that this algorithm is structured. And basically, the way it works is that the answer to that question determines how many points that question is worth. So Rachel can rate a question as being irrelevant, a little important, somewhat important, very important, or mandatory. And as you can see here, the point value is then assigned commensurate with what she said about that, and then that question is worth that particular number of points. So let's make this a little bit more concrete with an example. Do you like to watch sports on television? So Rachel would like a partner who says yes, because Rachel loves watching sports on television. And in fact, this question is very important to her. Because for Rachel, a critical part of the relationship is being able to sit on the couch and watch football with her boyfriend. So what answer did Ross actually give? Ross says yes. So Ross does enjoy watching sports on television, which means that relative to Rachel, he has gotten that answer correct. So how do we turn it into numbers? Well, the question was worth 50 points because it was very important. And Ross has gotten it right, so he gets 50 out of 50 possible points. Let's try another one. For a random question, would speaking in front of a large group make you nervous? So this time, Rachel wants the answer no. Rachel would prefer to date someone who isn't nervous, speaking in front of a large crowd. But this question is less important to her. It's only somewhat important. And this time, Ross gets it wrong because Ross says that he will actually get nervous speaking in front of a large crowd. So now this question is worth 10 points because this question was only somewhat important, but since he's got it wrong, that is now 0 points. So the sort of overall calculation now is how do we combine those two sets of points? So we have 50 points for a question that was very important, and 10 points for a question that was somewhat important. So that's the possible total number of points. The actual number of points scored were 50 and 0 because Ross got the first question right and the second question wrong. And so the total matched percentage is 50, which is the number of points that Ross actually scored, divided by 60, which is the number of points that Ross could possibly get. And that gives 0.83, or a matched percentage of 83%. Now this is of course a simplification because the process has to work both ways for how compatible is Ross for Rachel versus how compatible Rachel is for Ross. But that's the basic framework of how this works. And because of that might have been sort of unfamiliar to a lot of you, I'm just actually going to take a quick break and answer any questions that anyone has at this point before I go back. Yes.
The number 275,000 questions on OpenCube.
Mm-hmm.
This is the number of questions answered overall, the number of questions that, the pool of questions that the user can be asked. What is it?
So the question was, of those, what exactly do I mean when it says 275,000 questions? I actually believe that that's the number of different questions that you can answer on the site, at least as of 2011, because I think they're user submitted. or at least some of them are user submitted, which is what allows it, to become such an insanely large number. So obviously nobody at OkCupid is actually answering 275,000 questions. They're answering a subset of those.
This is the pool of questions.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm going to be talking about the relationships between some of those questions in probably about 10 minutes. Other questions? Okay, great. So, I'm going to start now by asking you all some questions because I think we should get to know each other better. So the first question that I want to ask you is, do you like horror movies? If you like horror movies, raise your hand. Okay, if you don't, raise your hand. Right, great. The second question is, have you ever traveled around another country alone? If you have, raise your hand. If you haven't, raise your hand. Awesome. And the third question is, wouldn't it be fun to chuck it all and go live on a sailboat? You think yes, raise your hand. No, raise your hand. All right. So I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to that in probably about 3 minutes. So I'm going to be spending this next bit of the talk talking about predictions. So I'm actually going to start by defining a term that's going to be very important to this second piece of my talk, and that term, which I'm sure most of you have heard before, is correlation. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page, when I say correlation, I mean how much do two quantities change together. So for example, here's a plot of temperature and ice cream consumption. You can see that as the temperature gets higher, ice cream consumption also gets higher, which is something that makes a lot of sense. So each of these points is showing that as, at this particular temperature, this is how much ice cream is consumed. And in fact, if I were to draw a line that I think best explains that data, or a line that best captures the overall shape of those points, that would be this diagonal line. So I would say that these are two quantities that are correlated. So temperature and the amount of ice cream consumed are correlated. But if we look instead at temperature and something like pizza consumption, we see that immediately there is no obvious trend anymore, and the amount of pizza consumed doesn't seem to depend at all very much on temperature. And if I were to draw a line to, again, try to capture this relationship, I would get this flat, horizontal, not very exciting looking line. And so this is something that I would say is uncorrelated. So when I refer to things being correlated for the rest of this talk, this is what I'm referring to. Okay, so let's talk about predictive power. How do we determine what data is useful? Now, when I say useful, I'm sort of using useful and predictive interchangeably. When I say that, I really mean data that correlates well with outcome. So not all questions are actually going to predict what we're interested in, which is, are people going to end up in a couple, right? Some questions are going to do a good job at predicting whether people are going to end up in a couple. Some questions are going to do a bad job at predicting. And it might sort of be interesting to dig into this data set and see which questions fall into which category. So to make that more concrete, a question that I think is likely useful or predictive is, do you believe contraception is morally wrong? Because this is the kind of question that if a couple disagrees on this, that could create really fundamental problems for that relationship. On the other hand, the question, are you ticklish, is probably not so useful, because while it's a fun fact to know about someone, it really doesn't tell you very much about the compatibility or likely compatibility of two people. So to sort of frame this more visually, we have these hundreds of thousands of questions from OpenAI, and we want to predict, are people going to end up in a couple or not end up in a couple? And the question really is, do we need all of these hundreds of thousands of questions, or is a lot of the information in those questions redundant? And further, are a lot of those questions actually just not predictive at all, not correlated at all with whether people end up in a couple? So what we want to do is get from what I just showed you to what I'm showing you now, which is that we've collapsed these hundreds of thousands of questions into a handful that seem to do most of the work in accurately predicting whether people end up in a couple. So how do we answer a question like that? And this is the kind of question that data scientists actually have to grapple with all the time, is trying to figure out which of their data is the most interesting and important. So what you actually need is data where we have both the predictors and the outcome. And so in this case, the predictors would be the answers to the questions, and the outcome would be people who actually became couples. And it turns out that OkCupid actually has this data, because one of the things you can do when you leave the website is say, I'm leaving the website because I have entered into a relationship with somebody else on OkCupid and provide them that person's username. So based on this, OkCupid was able to collect a database of about 30,000 couples, which is massive. And of course, they have the question answers that each member of those couples had provided before they actually got together. So we can actually look at that data set and answer this question about which data points are the most predictive. And that brings me back to these three questions. Do you like horror movies? Have you ever traveled around another country alone? And wouldn't it be fun to chuck it all and go live on a sailboat? So these are three questions that we could consider as, how predictive are these of whether people end up in a couple? How often do members of a couple agree on the answers to these questions? I'm going to actually present you with an alternative set of questions. Is God important in your life? Is physical intimacy the most important part of a relationship? And does smoking disgust you? And I'm actually going to ask you now, which of those two sets of questions do you think couples are more likely to agree on in this data set? So if you think that the first set of questions is going to be more predictive, raise your hand. Okay, if you think the second set, raise your hand. Well, it turns out I got you, because as a matter of fact, the first set of questions is substantially more predictive than the second set of questions. So the first set of questions, this is the percentage of couples who agreed on all three questions. Of all of the questions in their database that they determined were acceptable to ask on first date, those three questions were the most likely for couples to agree on, about 32%, which is 3 to 4 times more likely than what you would expect by chance. Versus the second set, which seems like it would be more predictive, but actually people only agreed on about 14% of the time. So still more than chance, but nowhere close to this more predictive set of questions. So that's pretty interesting. And I think that a lot of us are going to want to draw some really possibly wild conclusions about human nature on the basis of this finding. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to kill your party, because I don't think we can do that. And I want to talk to you about the reasons that we have to be very careful about interpreting these kinds of really interesting relationships. And that brings me to this section, my last section on correlation. So you'll remember that correlation is just assessing the relationship between two variables. So many of questions, of these hundreds of thousands of questions, are correlated. And by that I mean the answer to one question predicts the answer to the other question. So obviously many questions are correlated because they assess a similar trait. So for example, should evolution and creationism be taught side by side in schools? And do you put more weight in science or in faith? Those are questions that we would expect would be highly correlated to each other, because they're both measures of religiosity. They're both measures of how religious someone is. So that's no surprise. That's just redundancy in a lot of ways. But the other thing that happens, and it happens a lot, is that questions are correlated, and the reason they're correlated is actually that they reflect a third variable. What is a third variable? So if you have two variables that are correlated to each other, it might actually be that there is a third variable, another thing, that maybe you haven't measured and can't observe, and that thing is affecting each of your other variables, but you don't know about it because you're not measuring it or you're not checking it against these other variables, and therefore it appears as though there was a relationship of two variables that you were looking at originally, and they are correlated to each other, but only because of their independent relationship with this third thing that you don't necessarily have access to. So for an example, these two questions: have you ever traveled outside the country? And have you ever seen a therapist? Those are questions that I would say seem like pretty good OkCupid questions. They seem pretty interesting and helpful, possibly. But I would argue, and I don't think this detracts from whether they're useful or not, but I would argue that these questions are very likely to be correlated to each other. And the reason is not because there's anything obvious about why these two things should be causally related to each other, but actually because they both reflect socioeconomic status. It's extremely difficult to travel outside the country or to see a therapist if you don't have money. And so this is the kind of thing that happens across data sets all the time. There are these hidden things that are affecting the measured outcomes that you have, and that really hinders our ability to draw strong conclusions about our data. So that brings me to this point, which is data scientists' favorite thing to say, which is correlation does not imply causation. If you have a good predictor, or in this case, a question, that's good at predicting whether people are going to be in a couple, that predictor can be good because it's actually causal, it's actually responsible for why people are compatible, or it might reflect another variable that's causal that you can't see. And the really critical point, if you take nothing else from anything I tell you today, is that it's extremely difficult to tell the difference between those two situations, sometimes impossible, and frankly more often than not impossible. So to wrap up with an example of how this is true, here are 4 questions. Should burning your country's flag be illegal? Should gay marriage be legal? Should the death penalty be abolished? And should evolution and creationism be taught side by side in schools? These are all questions that we would all expect to be highly correlated because, of course, they all reflect your political and religious views. That's no surprise. But when OkCupid decided to do an analysis where they said, okay, let's look at these questions that we decided are acceptable to ask on first date. When they looked at those questions and said, which of those is the most predictive of your answer to these other 4, it turns out that that question is, do you prefer the people in your life to be simple or complex? And this is a pretty strong relationship to the tune of, if you prefer simplicity, you're 65 to 70% more likely to be conservative, and if you prefer complexity, you're 65 to 70% more likely to be liberal. And this is a situation where I would imagine it's evident to most of you that the direction of causality is not clear at all, because you can imagine that preferring people in your life to be a certain way causes you to have certain political or religious views. You can imagine that having certain political and religious views then shapes how you feel about the people in your life. Or, as I would argue is probably the most likely, it goes in both directions, and both of those things really shape each other. Which means that as much as we want to draw all these awesome and exciting conclusions about this, we have to be very, very cautious about that, because we have no idea what other things are going on in this data set or not in this data set that we can't see. So just to recap these lessons that I hope I've imparted to you, that algorithms can be an effective tool for using data. Not all variables are created equal. Some are more predictive than others. Some do a lot more of the work in predicting outcomes. And just because a variable is predictive doesn't mean we understand why it's predictive, and that's because correlation does not imply causation. And I'm happy to take any questions now. Questions?
I had a question, I forgot.
Just, I would say, one question is, how is that we have all this amount of data and all this technology, and yesterday's election, so we have really nobody participating. So this is very interesting.
So the question is how is it that we can have all of these amazing models and sources of data, and we can't accurately predict things like the outcome of an election? And I would actually say the answer to that is going to be somewhat addressed by Chalmers in the next section, because he's going to be talking about the limitations of big data. So there's a lot of issues that you can measure all of the things that you want, but if you're not measuring the right thing, then there's no way that your data is going to accurately predict an outcome. And so I think that there's a tendency for us to see big data as this panacea, where if we collect enough information, we'll be able to predict anything. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, because there are human biases involved, and just a lot of, and frankly, a lot of issues with collecting data, because we can't collect, all the data in the world. It's not possible. So I hope that answers your question, even though it sort of sounded vaguely rhetorical.
Was it ever an issue how some people would find it difficult to choose yes or no when the question has only those 2 options? Their answer is always, it depends, it's complicated. Was it not ever an issue of understudy?
So the question is it ever a problem when people have difficulty deciding between if there's just, yes or no possible answer?
Are there ways to handle that?
Right, so whether there's, if there's only these two choices and people don't necessarily feel strongly that they're one or the other, how does that work? So I mean, the full answer is, of course, I don't work with COVID, so I don't actually know if they have any particular ways of dealing with it. I would say as a general rule, one thing is you are allowed to skip questions. So if there's a question that you see that you don't know how to respond to, you don't actually have to answer it. So that actually probably takes care of some of it, because if it were me, I would avoid answering a question that I didn't have a clear answer to. Another thing is that I think a lot of what we're doing is that because the data is so big and we have so many questions, things like that are supposed to kind of wash out, because you're measuring enough data points that if some of them aren't perfectly accurate, you're sort of compensating by just the sort of overall volume that you have. It's hard to say, how well that works, because these are people and people are really complicated. But that's probably, if I had to guess, I would say if you ask someone from OKQ, that's probably what they would tell you. And of course, you can also mark the question as not being very important, which will then cause the question not to be weighted very highly.
To this question, some psychological testing will ask the same question multiple ways. So effectively giving it some context. So they will look at all the answers to basically the same question and determine if the person maybe is mixed in their answer or they're firm in their answer.
Yeah, the comment was that there are a lot of psychological surveys that will, sort of related to this problem that he was posing, will ask the same question in multiple ways to sort of evaluate internal consistency and things like that, which I think is probably a smart move, because we like to think we're consistent, but I think that the data probably shows that we're not. So.
All right, so we're going to take a 10-minute intermission. Also, the group has a lab tour at the end of this lecture. There's only space for about 10 to 15 people, so if you're interested, please sign up down there, and then we'll be back here in 10 minutes. Yeah. Also, we have surveys, so please grab one and give us feedback.
I did.
I was like, oh, nice job.
Yeah, we did not show the email.
I know. Everyone in the world is like.
No, I think they didn't.
You should like go and
Yeah. And I know that.
Oh, yeah, we were up there. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, we might see.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Hi, I was going to ask you, where is the data stored? Is it a database? Was it like a Red Hat database? Like a SQL server, Microsoft server, Oracle?
Like specific page or software or hardware that stores it, or
I wasn't there for that.
I think it always really on like who's storing it and like what kind of like organization. So like I think maybe it's kind of like two parts. Like say you want to video, or like a program. And like those questions are like, or what do you use?
Like, for that computer icon.
Yeah.
Which kind of software do you use to store the data over there?
Yeah, so these are like really specific computing architectures.
Like line Linux?
Yeah. So there's Linux is kind of like the operating system in which these things work in. So you may see like on TV or whatever, like when hackers are hacking online. So like if you have like an Apple,
Oh, yeah, no, I know. I was
you can
wondering
like turn
that.
on the computer or whatever, you can command line, and that's what's out there. And so you kind of like direct access to all the pieces of the computer really. And so when you have kind of like these high performance computing bits, you can kind of think of there are different pieces that they kind of one part that stores a lot of data, one part that does the calculation, and then they talk back and forth. So like on that computer, for example, there's like the main memory, which is big, so it has kind of like
Yeah, I work in IT.
oh, okay, sorry, yeah. So
For example, Dr. Watson, is that actually better than, sorry, not Dr. Watson?
Yeah.
That even Python is maybe better than Watson or?
Yeah, so
Like Watson.
Yeah. I to be honest, I don't know about IBM's like computer architecture.
Oh my God.
Mildly
It's okay.
proprietary. But like at least for like the type of computers,
That's just
like they're crazy. So that, you have like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of things that are all in the process. And so like actually one of the most challenging things is getting them to talk to one another. So like imagine you have like 200 million people each doing a calculation. How do you have person 27 tell
I
person
literally like
360,272 like, oh, we got the same answer? You know, it's like I think some of the hardest problems now are getting those like things to talk to one another and they kind of like you kind of wrangle the data. You know, it's like it's crazy, but like these architectures are like the actual ways they like the hardware that does it.
Storage is like Flash.
The newer ones are flash storage, yeah, but I'd say you just have like racks like you're just like regular like memory storage. So I would like in many of those you might have like part of the storage center you'll have like either flash or and then you'll have the processing that's done on like another drive. So whenever you have these kind of like computing, it's always like you're talking on like a scale of like milli to microseconds. So the reason we separate those is that the processing needs to be done in like the microsecond scale. So if we think about like a microsecond relative to a millisecond, it takes a millisecond for the computer to talk to kind of like the hardware. That takes like a millisecond, which is actually a really long time. So many times what'll happen is, say if I have a library, and it takes a really long time to go to the library to pick up a book. I'll go and grab the whole book and bring it back. So really efficient use of getting like the large storage file information, which is done on your hard drive, bringing that onto your local memory, which is read it, and then doing all the process, because that can be done in microseconds. So you do all that processing really quickly. It's like, it's easy. At that point, you're talking about like the physical presentation of which is like, so it takes a long time to go there, but like you just do the calculation real fast, do the processing, and then put it back on RAM. And so like when you now have to coordinate millions of these, it's like it's really hard. So you just kind of run into like real problems trying to like shove all that stuff. That was somewhat helpful. So. Great, yeah. Yeah, so it's fun stuff. I don't know. Yeah, some of these computers are big and/or like so. I go to like the supercomputing conferences. Like I sometimes go to those, and they're like, "We're building them, but we want to make sure that we have people that can use it." So like they like build these computers because you see like sometimes there's this thing in tech that supercomputing exists, and so you know other like countries will compete. So yes, yeah. And so like the question is like so what I always wonder is like for some of these like really like fastest computers in the world, it's like it's actually really hard to get programs to run on. So because like
you would spend half of your time solving the problem, training to work on this thing. So it's like, so the vast majority of the time, there are specific problems where that is like really challenging, like the weather, for example. In a lot of these, a lot of simulations, right? It's like if I drop this ball or I do something, how does it interact with other things? Those are really hard to solve.
Right now,
Yeah, I'll get the mic set up on the rocks. Yeah. Wow, yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, yeah. It's moving so quick. I'm sure you've probably seen this too. It's just like it's
Okay, everyone. I think we're going to come back together for the final part of the lecture. Keep in mind that you will also have time to ask our speakers questions after the lecture and during the lab tour if you'd like to attend. Again, please write your name on the sign-up sheet if you'd like to go. You don't have to do it right now. You can also do it after. And I just want to remind everyone about our lecture surveys. They really help us improve as an organization and continue to make these lectures more positive experiences for you, our audience members. So please fill one out if you have the chance. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm a fourth year student in the Biological and Biological Sciences program. My name is Chana Fonseca, and so I'll be kind of finishing off our talk here. So, we had Adam really talk to you about sort of the history and how computing works and data storage works, and really explaining how big data is. Rebecca did a great job of walking through how algorithms are specifically using online dating as an example. And so for this final part, I'm going to talk about where big data is in use today and where it's going to kind of go into the future. And that's and then kind of in between those, what are like the rules and the framework around how we use data? And so the first question I want to ask is where is big data used in our lives today? And the answer is really that it's used everywhere. I mean, you might think that this is something that just mainly affects you if you're online using your phone, or if you're on a database, if you're booking travel online, or even browsing through movies. But the reality is that big data is playing a larger and larger role in how life works offline as well. And so to give a couple examples, things like transportation planning, so how traffic signals are timed throughout the city rely on huge amounts of data, where traffic's flowing to kind of figure that out, while medical services and even restaurants use big data in their day-to-day operations. And as big data is getting applied to all these areas of life, this can have many advantages, but it can bring up unexpected problems. And to put that into some context, I'm going to use two examples of how big data is used today. So one coming from kind of emergency medicine, and the other from travel booking. So ER wait times is going to be the first example. So, in the emergency room, patients are triaged or seen based on the severity of their emergency. So the wait time for a given patient isn't dependent on who got there first, but who needs treatment first. So thus, even if the patient on the right, complaining of stomach ailment arrived at the ER first, the patient on the left with the more severe condition must be seen first. And so let me ask people who know this question. You can raise your hand. How many times if you've had to visit the emergency room, do you feel like you were waiting for a long period of time? Yes. So this isn't uncommon at all. The frequency of ER visits has increased over the past decade by about 5%. And, the fact is that ER overcrowding and, the wait times don't just affect how happy people are when they're there, but can actually affect how well they recover. So multiple studies have shown that informing people of how long they have to wait, actually improves their satisfaction and their outcomes. But you can imagine this isn't actually easy to do, given that the order in which people are seen depends on how severe their injury or emergency is. And it can depend on how many other people are in the ER and various other factors. So in 2015, there was a study conducted at the Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, which is pictured above. And the researchers were trying to use some data science techniques to model expected ER wait times and see if they could improve overall satisfaction. So the question we asked is really, how can we use big data to do that? And so the answer is that they built this model, algorithm, based on historical data collected over the past couple of years of ER, of patients who visit the emergency department. And so the algorithm is based on 3 variables: the day of the week, the time of day, and the level of emergency or severity. And so, and then, you put those 3 variables into the algorithm and you can get out an expected wait time. So let's say you came into the emergency department on a Monday at 11 a.m. With an emergency that's classified as a level 3. So that's something more severe than, say, a stomachache, but not life-threatening. So using all of those variables, what the algorithm researchers built, it looks at the historical data for the past couple of years at that hospital and calculates that, all the patients that came in at Monday at 11 o'clock with that severity of condition, they waited about 40 minutes before being seen. And so what the researchers found is that even though the main factors that really drive patient satisfaction with the emergency department is the nature of their emergency, informing patients that are expected wait time really improve their overall experience regardless. And this is kind of an example, and this is something where you really needed the ability to store large amounts of data and a way to calculate it to be able to tell people their expected wait time is accurate. And that's a good example of how you can use big data in ways you might not think to benefit everyday life. Now, for my second example, so, over the past 20 years or so, the idea of going to a travel agent to book your travel has just kind of disappeared as there's online services that have come to replace that. So you might know some of these sites, but they all kind of have the same features, whether it's Travelocity or Orbit or Hotels.com. They list prices of things you might want to do, like rent a car or book a flight, and then you book the service to that website. And they claim that they provide you with the lowest bid price option available. And so what these websites do, like many other websites like Google and Amazon that are considered e-commerce or websites where you purchase things online, they employ a technique called content personalization. So that term really means that your personal information of the customer is used to kind of specify what options are available to them. And so, for example, let's pretend that you're someone who purchases a lot of woodworking tools and you do a lot of that in your spare time, and you do that off Amazon. If you type the word router into Amazon, it'll use that history that you're always, purchasing woodworking tools, and it'll give you results that correspond to this type of router on the left, which is actually used in woodworking, rather than the one on the right, which is used, for internet networking. So content personalization in and of itself isn't necessarily a negative thing. In fact, it's an effective way to help people get results that are more relevant to them more quickly, and it's more likely that they'll be able to find things they're looking for. However, websites can also take advantage of the information they have about their users in slightly more nefarious ways, such as showing different items or different prices to different consumers. And this is called price discrimination or price steering. So to test this, there are researchers from Northeastern University here in Boston tested multiple different online commerce websites with this following setup. So they recruited people to perform the exact same search for the same items and report the prices they were shown. Half of the users were controls, where they used some routing techniques to remove all of their purchasing history and identifiable information. So for the websites, these were people they'd never seen before and they had no information on. While the other half were so-called real users who had their normal internet histories and histories that the website could see. And what they found is that real users of internet histories often saw higher prices than controls without histories. So in this example, the users searching for the exact same hotels and controls saw a price that was about $60, $70 higher than other people were shown. On other sites, researchers found that if you're a member of the site, you actually receive a lower rate than you do for a non-member. Although in this example, the pricing difference was slightly small. And so overall, the number of products or different flights, different hotels, different items where websites use price discrimination or steering is relatively small. So in this study, it was only about 4% of different items had different prices. But multiple studies have shown that this is widespread in a lot of different online shopping. And it brings up a lot of questions. Like, what if you used your friend's computer or phone to make a purchase? Is it fair or even legal to use someone else's browsing history, but then give you a different price based on that? And that brings me nicely to kind of my second point. What are the rules of the road for big data? And so you might be surprised to learn that there are effectively no limits or rules about how data science can kind of be applied and what they're allowed to use it for. And that's because the vast majority of algorithms are created and controlled by private companies. So information about them is hard to find and incomplete. When you sign up for a service like eBay or Google's email account service, Gmail, you often click through a privacy agreement that allows them to store huge amounts of data for indefinite periods of time. Yet, how they use this data is proprietary, and it's not shared with the users or any regulatory body, and it can't really be disclosed to the public. And what companies will say in their defense is, this isn't something you need to worry about. Our algorithms are simply mathematical, and they can't really be biased or affect people. And I would say, don't believe them. Algorithms are not perfect. And I'm going to talk really about two kind of limitations of big data that should hopefully drill home that point. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what's called variable inaccuracy. And this is the idea that the data that you're putting into an algorithm is often imperfect and not inaccurate, even when you think you're measuring something inaccurately. And this is especially true of self-reported data. So to go back to an example from the online dating world. So the graph here that I'm showing you shows the distribution of heights for adult men in the United States, where heights here on the x-axis on the bottom, and the percentage of men at that height is on the vertical axis, the y-axis. And so you can see here the average height of adult American males is about 5'10", roughly 14% of the population is that height. Now, this second graph in the dotted line is the self-reported height of men based on their OkCupid profiles. And you might notice a few things. First, the overall men tend to self-report their height about an inch or two higher than the entire population is. So that kind of tells you something about how people tend to report data. And you can also tell that that little flattened area right at the top is that people tend to round up around 6 feet for some reason. So if you were building an algorithm that relied on that data, you would overestimate the height of American males, and that could significantly affect the accuracy of the algorithm and how it performs. So this is an example where a variable can be inaccurate when you might not think so. So another problem that plagues data and algorithms is a problem called overfitting. This is a kind of complicated topic, but it can be boiled down to the fact that algorithms that are built on past data can be very accurate when predicting past results, but then fail when predicting future results. And algorithms that are particularly sensitive to that are considered overfit. And to illustrate this, I'm going to use an example that was originally described by Karl Popper, a famous philosopher of science. So let's imagine we're on a farm where this turkey lives. So every morning, about an hour after the sun rises, the farmer comes out to feed it. The food is really good, the turkey loves it, and it comes to look forward to each morning when the farmer visits and gives food. So after a couple of weeks, this is a pretty clever turkey. He looks over all of the data he's collected, and he realizes he's always fed her roughly an hour after sunrise. Some mornings it's a little later, some mornings a little earlier. But without fail, he gets fed when the sun goes up. So our clever turkey uses this to build a simple algorithm. Sunrise plus 1 hour, give or take a few minutes, equals food. So the next day, hour after sunrise, he gets fed. The algorithm works. So, the turkey is like, this is great. Life is great, the trend continues, and every day, the turkey's pretty confident that it understands how the world works. So one morning, an hour past sunrise, the turkey is surprised to find that when the farmer comes up, he's not actually carrying a bag of food this morning. And a couple hours later, well, the turkey is now Thanksgiving dinner. So the point of this story is that even though the turkey's model fit all of the historical data perfectly, it couldn't deal with an outcome it hadn't ever previously observed. So the model was overfit. And this problem plagues data from this kind of toy example all the way up to incredibly complicated examples developed by the world's top data scientists. No matter how complicated the algorithm or clever the humans designing it are, overfitting is an issue. And so algorithms aren't just math. The models are created by humans, and so they incorporate human biases, whether it's self-reported data and measured variables that are imperfect and can be misinterpreted. And then on top of that, the lack of transparency and regulations around how data is used is kind of an ongoing challenge. So for this last part, I just kind of want to touch briefly on where big data is going in the future. So the range of tasks that you can apply data science to is ever increasing. One example is that after years of research, we can now really teach computers how to read books, and this is part of multiple efforts to digitize libraries completely. And so instead of having to go to a library and type in every single book, every line after line, we can train algorithms to recognize the characters. That a letter A means A letter B means B, and so on, and they can effectively read that and automatically parse them into a digital format. You might have heard of the Precision Medicine Initiative. So last year that was announced by President Obama, and the idea here is to modify medical care to tailor it to individuals. So kind of like how content personalization tailors the things you might see while you're online shopping. Precision medicine would tailor the type of treatment you receive to your medical conditions and your test results. And so the idea here is that you can tailor medication and treatment to give the biggest, to have the greatest impact on you specifically. So maybe for some people, half as much of a medication will be perfect, while other people might need to take twice as much of that same medication to minimize side effects and get kind of the greatest good. Finally, there's been kind of a great deal of media attention on the development of self-driving cars. And so there's many different prototypes that are kind of being developed. This is the Google self-driving car, which looks like a happy face. But all of them, regardless of the technology, rely on algorithms to do visual processing. So that sounds kind of complex, but you do this all the time. For example, if you see a stop sign, you know what that is. And if you see it in a different context, like in the desert or in the tundra or someplace you've never been, you'll still recognize what a stop sign is and what it's trying to tell you. To do this to a car, you really need to give it tons of examples, and that's that big data aspect we're talking about. So it can learn that this, octagon-shaped red thing means stop, and the car should stop. And, these three examples, all of them rely on the fact that you need to be able to store and process huge amounts of data. They're not really fundamentally different on the kind of computation level. And so, kind of in conclusion, algorithms and big data are going to continue to get better and better at simulating, and in some cases completely replicating what humans can do. And it's really up to us as a society to decide how we're going to use these tools and for what purpose in the future. What limitations should exist and what's fair and what's not for data science. So that's kind of it from my part. I'd be happy to take any questions about big data in the future.
I'm glad you mentioned overfitting.
Sure.
And the fact that models don't necessarily account for events or for situations such as the turkey actually being cooked. So I'm wondering, what are some of the best methods that we can think of right now for accounting for some of these unanticipated events, especially if we move towards very much day-to-day uses like with autonomous cars, in which, yes, there may be things that are currently outside the realm of what the Google model might be predicting, but are still possible on the road.
Right. So the question was, how can we kind of combat this problem of overfitting? It will, continue to be a problem, especially if we incorporate algorithms more and more into day-to-day life. So I actually like the example of the self-driving car, right? Because you can think of, you can train the car to stop when it sees a kid crossing the road. But if you've ever driven up here in the Northeast and it sees a turkey crossing the road, that's something that's new. But you still kind of want to get the car to stop. And so what we do actually when we build algorithms is you kind of add a little slack to the model almost. So you give it the ability to, it doesn't need to be maybe perfect. So maybe it doesn't always stop automatically for every past example, but you give it the ability to learn almost that. So when the algorithm is presented with something it doesn't really know, it can kind of compare that to past examples and get its best guess. And this is obviously not going to be perfect every time. But that's, to some extent, there are things that you can predict and things that you've never seen before. And without human intervention, the best thing you can do is just give it the room to figure it out on its own, basically. Any other questions? Yep.
There's probably different reasons that different companies or organizations are collecting information. But I was wondering, is there any way to know, is there a common understanding as to what the most common categories, the purpose of collecting information is? Like, I mean, is it, like you're saying, that it could be nefarious, like they may be trying to find out people's birthdays and stuff like that, even though they're not supposed to be collecting private information. You see what I'm saying? Is there a common 5 category of what almost all these data collection companies are looking for?
Yeah, so the question is like, why do companies collect so much data? Like, what's the most common reason to do so? So it really depends kind of on the industry or the business. The most probably common way that this is applied right now is really advertising, especially online advertising. So one thing almost all companies will do, even if they don't use that themselves, is they try to build a profile of who the user is. So when you're on your computer or your phone, they try to guess really your age, where you're from, what you're interested in. In fact, if you go to Google's website, you can see what it thinks, how old you are, what your interests are. And even if the companies don't really use that data directly, they sell it on where it's advertising companies. So I would say that's really the most common use right now, is try to profile individuals. And that way you can basically target ads that they're more interested in, more likely to click on. Okay. Yeah, if there's no other questions, so I'd like to go into a acknowledgement slide, and we'd be happy to take some people up for a lap after the talk. Okay.
Yeah, no, I like. Yeah, exactly. Hi. Yeah, no. Hey guys. Okay, sweet. Oh, yeah.
You guys are taping a live stream.
The live stream is for people who have
Self-promotion.